system in the human body is the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system is important in that virtually each and every system in the human body uses the cardiovascular system. So now I'm going to discuss today the cardiovascular system. When you hear this word cardiovascular, we are talking about organ system responsible for transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. You all know that the essence of blood in our own body is to make ourselves to survive. Because in the blood, we have oxygen, we have carbon dioxide. Oxygen is around the atmosphere. And so we breathe it in, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. You get my point? The breathing in of oxygen and breathing out of the carbon dioxide, all this is as a result of the cardiovascular system. So the oxygen that we inhale in is being taken through the lungs and through the cardiovascular system. So it circulates in the body. So one of the functions of the cardiovascular system, which I said is an organ system, is responsible for the transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide, means transportation of gases. And then similarly, it is also important in the transportation of nutrients. We do eat. When we eat, our own gastrointestinal system or the digestive system is responsible for degrading down all the food substances that we do eat, ranging from the hard substances like tuwon shinkafa, and eba, amala, and so on and so forth. All these carbohydrates, proteins, and fats and oils, they are all been taken through our own gastrointestinal tract, and the GIT is going to degrade down all these food substances, and so it is now going to be taken into the circulation. So the cardiovascular system is responsible for carrying out this already digested, nutrients. And then, apart from transportation of the nutrients, the cardiovascular system is also responsible for transportation of minerals. You all know what are minerals. All these are important food substances that we do take, like all these micronutrients, the electrolytes, are there. The vitamins are also there. All this, the toxic waste, the hormones are all being taken down to be transported by the cardiovascular system. One of the major functions of the cardiovascular system, apart from this transportation of oxygen and all the substances that are already, discussed, is the purpose of this cardiovascular system is to maintain the body pH by, taking in this oxygen and bringing out this carbon dioxide. And also, because, blood is responsible for also exposing the heat out. So all the metabolic, processes that is taking place within us, after degrading out of all these food particles that we do take, there is a release of energy and heat. The heat that we do release from the metabolism of this carbohydrate, protein, and whatever, the heat is going to be transported down out of our own body by the cardiovascular system. That means it's going to maintain the optimum internal body temperature. That is one of the major functions of this cardiovascular system. So it regulates or maintains our own body temperature. Similarly, it also fights diseases, because within the cardiovascular system, we have variety of blood cells. We have the white blood cells, we have the platelets, and then we have the red blood cells. Among these three categories of cells, the white blood cells are the ones that are responsible for, the fighting of diseases, because they are responsible for the immune response. Similarly, it maintains homeostasis. Homeostasis in the sense that it maintains the normal body process. So these are part of the basic introduction about the functions of the cardiovascular system. So, the cardiovascular system, when we want to discuss the histology of the cardiovascular system, we think about the components of this cardiovascular system. We are all aware that when you hear this word cardio, you're talking about the heart. cardiac, heart. Vascular, you're talking about the vessels. So that means heart, and it is great vessels. That is what it meant by cardiovascular system. So along the line, I'm going to discuss the histology of the heart and histology of the great vessels. These great vessels include arteries, arterioles, arteries and veins. These are the great vessels, and they emanate from the heart. And so it is these arteries and the veins that finally give rise to the smaller vessels. So now it's supposed to say that the arteries, we have what you call large arteries, and then we have medium arteries, and then we also have smaller arteries. The same thing with the veins. You get it? So we also have the capillaries. You get my point? So now the heart gives rise to the arteries, and the arteries, we have these categories, large, medium, and small, and then we have the capillaries, and then finally we have the veins and the venules. So why the division of these arteries or veins is something to do with the size. When you hear large or small, it is directly telling us this one is bigger, this one is smaller as compared to the other. So we are talking about the size of the vessels when we term something large, medium, or small. So the artery or a vein, they have similar structures, but then there are variations. What are these common structures that they do have? We have what we call tunica interna or tunica intima. That means we can call it tunica interna or intima. So that means there is an internal layer. That's what it means. This internal layer is made up of a simple squamous epithelium. You have already done epithelial tissues in your first semester. So the epithelial tissue, we have what you call simple epithelial tissue. That simple epithelial tissue consists of this simple squamous epithelium. Simple squamous epithelium, when you hear this word squamous, it means flat. So you have the internal layer basically made up of simple flat cells. Because they are located inside, they are called internal flat cells. And because they develop from the endoderm, you know that all our structures in our own human body, they develop from 3 basic embryologic layers. That means the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So the epithelial cells lining the blood vessels, they develop from endoderm. That is why they are called endothelial cells. Endo from endoderm. So the simple squamous epithelial cells within the epithelial cells, within the arteries, is made up of these endothelial cells, flat or squamous epithelium. These endothelial cells, they have been surrounded by what you call subepithelial or subendothelial layer. This subendothelial layer is made up of connective tissues. So next to it is what we call internal elastic lamina. So we have internal elastic lamina surrounding the subendothelial layer. As I told you before, the subendothelial layer consists of connective tissue made up of some connective tissue cells and connective tissue fibers. And then next you have this internal elastic lamina surrounding the subendothelial layer. So the 3 together, that means endothelial layer, subendothelial layer, and internal elastic lamina. The 3 together, they form what we call tunica interna or tunica intima. So you either call it tunica interna or tunica intima. So this tunica intima or interna is made up of this endothelial layer or endothelial cells, subendothelial layer, and internal elastic lamina. So the three components, they form this tunica interna. That's what we are going to see histologically. Then next layer surrounding an artery or a vein is what we call smooth muscle layer. Smooth muscle layer is, surrounding this tunica intima, and apart from this smooth muscle layer, we also have interspersed, laminae of elastic fibers. These elastic fibers, they are part of the connective tissue fibers. So you have various elastic tissue fibers with some, small amount of collagen fibers and some reticular fibers also interspersed along this, smooth muscle layer. But the majority of the cells that can be found in this tunica media is the smooth muscles with this interspersed, laminae of elastic fibers. So now the smooth muscle layer surrounding this tunica interna is what we refer to as tunica media. So the tunica media is purely made up of smooth muscles plus the elastic connective tissue fibers. Are you clear? So after that, we have what you call external, elastic lamina. This external elastic lamina plus the internal elastic lamina, they are all made up of purely elastic fibers. These elastic connective tissue fibers, they are part of the categories or types of connective tissue fibers. Connective tissue fibers is made up of three. We have what you call elastic fibers, we have collagen fibers, and the reticular fibers. We also have connective tissue cells. You get my point? So here, the tunica interna, internal elastic lamina and the external elastic lamina, they are all made up of these elastic, fibers. So some people consider this external elastic lamina to be part of the tunica media. So surrounding the external elastic lamina, we have what we call the tunica adventitia. This tunica adventitia can also be called tunica externa. So you either call it tunica adventitia or tunica externa. So now we have three basic tunicae. Tunica externa, purely made up of connective tissue fibers, purely collagenous. And then we have the tunica media, made up of smooth muscles plus elastic fibers. We also have the external elastic lamina, part of the tunica media. Then the tunica intima, as I told you before, is made up of these endothelial cells, subendothelial connective tissue layer, and then the internal elastic lamina. These are the three basic components that one can see whether in a vein or in an artery, be it a small artery, medium artery, or large artery, be it a small vein or a large vein. So what are the differences between an artery and a vein? So the only differences between an artery and a vein with regard to this histologic arrangement, everything is the same. But the only difference is that when you look at it under a microscope, if it is a vein, instead of you to see this lumen round like that, it's going to be collapsed, like this. Something to do like this, It's going to be not round like this one. So the veins are collapsible. You get my point? So the lumen is not going to be round like this one, like in the artery. But with regard to the veins, they are going to be collapsed like that. That is one. Similarly, the tunica interna, which is part of the, internal elastic lamina, which is part of the tunica tunica interna, and also the external elastic lamina, the two together may or may not be present with regard to the veins. So mostly in the veins, you may not see the internal and external elastic laminae. That means you will not be able to differentiate between the tunica, the junction between the tunica interna and tunica media. Similarly, you may not likely be able to distinguish between the tunica media and tunica, externa or adventitia, because you will not see this, serrated, tunica externa here. You may not also likely see this this internal elastic lamina. Are you clear? So these are two of the differences. Another difference is that because arteries, they carry blood with a higher pressure from the heart. And so for them to be able to push blood into different parts of the body, they must be strong. So that means the tunica media there, it must be thicker. Are you clear? So that means the tunica, the quantity of the smooth muscle fibers in arteries, because they carry blood with a higher pressure, so as to be able to distribute the blood to the different part of the body. So the tunica media is going to be larger or greater with regard to when you compare it with the vein. So that means the size of the tunica media in the veins is going to be smaller. Are you clear? Good. Similarly, the connective tissue layer, the outside layer, that is the tunica externa, which is very small compared to the vein. So in the veins, the tunica externa is going to be more abundant. So that means the tunica media, as I said earlier, is going to be more in the arteries than in the veins. The tunica externa or tunica adventitia is going to be more in the veins than in the arteries. And I said that the internal elastic lamina, which is this one, and the external elastic lamina, which is this one, are not mostly present in the veins, but in the arteries they are clearly seen. How many differences did I mention? 3. The lumen is round with regard to the arteries, but in the veins it is collapsible. That is 1. 2, the internal elastic lamina and the external elastic lamina are not present. That is the second differences. Similarly, the tunica media is thicker in arteries than in the veins. These are the third differences. And the fourth difference is that with regard to the veins, the tunica externa is more. You get my point? These are the fourth differences. Are you all clear? These are the differences. So I don't need to draw the structure or histological structure of a vein if you understood this one. So once you know the basic histology of an artery, definitely you should be able to draw that of a vein. So if I now ask you to draw the histology of a vein, I'm sure you are going to draw it based on these variations that I've made mention. That is a histology of a vein and an artery. So now the arterioles, they are the smaller veins. Smaller arteries. So that means everything with regard to this, structure that I made mention, they are the same. But the only difference is that the size varies. That means arterioles are smaller arteries. So that means they have the same histologic arrangement. But the only difference is that is the size of the vessel. That is what matters. When you now talk about the capillaries or venules, we are talking about only 2 histologic layers. When you take the capillaries, there are 3 categories of capillaries. There is what we call sinusoidal capillary. We have fenestrated capillary, and then we also have what we call continuous capillaries. Each capillary, as I told you, it is made up of only 2 layers. Reason because capillaries are the last vessels when we now talk about the divisions of the vessels of the heart or the arteries. So these 2 layers include the endothelial cells and also the basement membrane, the one you have seen in blue. And the endothelial cells are the ones in red. So these are the 2 layers I'm talking about. So now, when you now talk about the sinusoidal capillaries, there are gaps in between the endothelial cells. That means between one endothelial cells and the other, there is a gap, there a very wide gap, so as to allow whatever is inside the capillary to get out. So this gap here, it can allow for movement of structures out of the capillaries to go into the intercellular spaces or into the cells. Similarly, when you now take the fenestrated, capillaries, the cells, if this is just a single cell, single endothelial cells, so there is a hole passing through the endothelial cells. So that is what we mean by fenestration. So single cell is going to be whole, so that also it can also allow for the movement of substances out of the capillaries. Similarly, we have what we call continuous capillaries. These ones, there is no gap between one cell and another. That is why they are called continuous capillaries. So the whole endothelial cells here now, there is no gap in between the cells. Even though there is no gap in between the cells, the other small, substances can get out of these capillaries by diffusion, like the oxygen, carbon dioxide, and so on and so forth, can get out of the capillary by diffusion. So for the fenestrated type of the capillaries, it can get out of the fenestration. So with regard to the sinusoidal capillaries, the substances within the capillary can get out of the capillaries and to go into the intercellular or into the cells. So these are the various categories or types of the capillaries one can see histologically, and also the similarities between the artery and the vein, as well as the differences. So let me just have a break now, and then finally I will discuss the histology of the heart.